Okay, welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can add automated text generation to your low-code and no-code apps without writing any code and without having a GPT-3 license. So we're going to be using Bubble to build the front end, and we're going to be using a model from Eleuther.ai called GPT-Neo, and we're going to be connecting to that through an API provided by huggingface.co. And so I'll talk a bit about each of these going forward, but first let's take a look at the app that we're going to build. We're going to build a simple interface to allow users to input some text and generate some text from that. So here I have some examples of previous prompts and the text that the model generates. So for example, more people than ever are, we generate this text here. More people than ever are considering a career in teaching, so on and so forth. And got a bunch of examples here. So machine learning is impacting all areas of industries as it matures, the possibilities for applying this technology to real world problems, yada, yada, yada. And so you can use this sort of model to generate text that's more like fiction. So for example, here, Jake left the football stadium and iced his left knee. He's on backup to Alex Smith for the rest of the season. I'm not sure if this is fiction or sports reporting, but sometimes it sounds the same. We've got here, business opportunities can be touched. The more business opportunities you have to explore, the more money you make. Marketing is our superpower. We have a proven track record with Fortune 500 companies and other large growing companies. So you can put all sorts of different prompts in here and get reasonably sensible responses back. So I'll try a few more just to show you the sort of things that you can get out. I'll just generate another one with the same prompt and see the difference. So here we have more people than ever wearing a hat or a scarf or wearing a jacket or a sweater. Let's say our marketing team is here to help you with, and see what we get back from this. Help you with any questions that you have on this project. For more information, we've got some HTML here to strip out. So yeah, this is sort of sensible. Our marketing team is here to help you with the tools and strategies you need to drive greater engagement and impact from your corporate website. Let's try when we return from overseas. Let's see what this gives us. We'll be like a new family. That's got everything all figured out. You have to go to church. Not sure if this is a song or something. We'll take a little time to go to my brother's house and there we'll get drunk. Not sure where these hashtags are coming from, but yeah. So this sort of sounds more poetic or fiction-like. Our new product launch was a... so you can have lots of fun generating text. It was a huge success and a significant hit, so we moved ahead with the next thing, which was that we made a decision to get a new, much bigger place. Oh man, sometimes these are really funny. Okay, so we'll do one more and then see. What was that? Not sure what this meant to be. 30 million pounds maybe. Multi-channel marketing campaign designed to drive sales of both products simultaneously, but without changing the product at all. Okay, so yeah, so we got a number of different prompts here. Okay, so now let's look at the various pieces needed to build this app, and then we'll get into how to connect them in a minute. So if we come back to the overview, we're building the front end in Bubble. We're going to be talking to the Hugging Face Accelerated Inference API through the Hugging Face website using a REST API endpoint. And that's going to be talking to the Eleuther.ai GPT-Neo model. So if we do these sort of in order, this is all the stuff in Bubble that we're going to be building. So the input for the text for the user, the button, the display of the text that's coming back, and so forth. And so if you're not familiar with Bubble, this is the bubble.io homepage. It bills itself as the best way to build web apps without code. It's quite a powerful platform. If you've never used it, I'd recommend it. It's great for building web apps quickly. The second thing we're going to be using is huggingface.co. And so Hugging Face is an AI research and technology group. They do some fantastic work in natural language processing. They're used by lots of big companies and institutes like Facebook, the Allen Institute for AI, Microsoft, and so forth, Google. So if you're doing any sort of NLP, you may be familiar with them. Their Transformers package for Python is extremely popular, and that's how the Eleuther.ai model can be accessed sort of outside of this ecosystem, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Yeah, so if you're in NLP, check these guys out. These folks do some great work. And then Eleuther.ai, come back here. They build themselves as a decentralized grassroots collective of volunteer researchers, engineers, and developers focused on AI, alignment, scaling, and open source AI research. So these folks are also doing some great work in natural language processing research, and the sort of fit between what they're doing on the research and technology side and the hosting capabilities of Hugging Face is quite a nice fit. So basically, Eleuther has hosted one of their models on Hugging Face, and we're going to be talking to the Eleuther model through Hugging Face. It's pretty straightforward. So what we're going to do is use Bubble.io's API connector to connect to Hugging Face, which will call the Eleuther model, send back a response, and eventually we'll ingest that in Bubble, and that's what we see over here. Whoops. Here, so when we click generate, we're sending off this text to this Eleuther model. Really, this model here, see Eleuther.ai on the Hugging Face website. We're going to be sending off our prompt in just the same way here, as you can test the inference by just coming to this page. And I'll go through this a bit more slowly in a second, but you see you get the same sort of thing that we were getting in the intro. So you get a string of words or sequence of words based on the prompt that you inputted. Okay, and two last points of discussion before we go into wiring everything up. First, I misspoke a little bit a second ago when I said that Eleuther has hosted one of their models on Hugging Face. I believe they actually have 3 here. So you can see, maybe embiggen this a little bit, Eleuther.ai has 3 variants of the GPT-Neo architecture. So these are just different numbers of parameters for pre-trained models that you can run inference against. So 125 million parameters, 1.3 billion parameters, and 2.7 billion. And so, in effect, the bigger the model, the more sensible or coherent the text that you will get out, but also the more intense the compute required to generate an inference. So, for example, you can run this 1.3 billion parameter. You can run inference against this locally on a virtual machine or a local machine that has about 16 gigs of RAM, but this will crash that. You need somewhere north of 20 or 25 gigs to load this into memory. But anyway, they're all based on the GPT-Neo architecture, and this GPT-Neo architecture is an open source implementation from Eleuther of the GPT-3 architecture from OpenAI. So if you've been following natural language processing over the last couple of years, you've probably been exposed to GPT-3, which has generated enormous amounts of press and interest and product ideas. But one of the pain points for people interested in this model, this application, is that it's difficult to get access. There's a sort of a long wait list, and you need to be approved to get access to the API to call inference against this model. Which is part of the reason I'm making this tutorial, and more importantly, is part of the reason that Eleuther.ai has built GPT-Neo is to make generative pre-trained models, transformers, available to more people. So GPT-3 has, I think, 175 billion parameters. It says it in here somewhere. I don't see it right now. Whereas, let me see. Yeah, here it is, 175 billion machine learning parameters, whereas Eleuther.ai, as we can see here, the largest one, the one that we're going to be using, has 2.7 billion, so there's quite a significant size difference in the size of the model, and the output sort of reflects that. The output that you can generate with GPT-3 is more comprehensive, more coherent, long-form text, and there are a lot more sort of switches and dials and levers that you can turn to modify the text, the output text, to your liking. Okay, so now that's that's enough background on GPT-3 and GPT-Neo and Hugging Face and Eleuther. And so now let's look into how to get access to this API and connect it to your Bubble apps. So the first thing to do would be to go to huggingface.co. And so if you come to huggingface.co, you can click sign up, enter an email address and a password. And I think you just have to confirm your email address, and then you'll be able to log into the platform. And once you log in, you can access the accelerated inference API. So I don't believe I have. And the Accelerated Inference API is just a way to access the models that are hosted on Hugging Face on their infrastructure just by using some REST API calls. And so you can see down here, if you open any model, I'm not sure if this is true of all models actually, but let's say you open this one, which is the one that we're interested in. You see down here the Hosted Inference API, and you can click here for documentation. Or you can enter in here, you can enter something in and say no code platforms will be, and then just generate a sample response. And you don't need to have an API key to do this. So it will be the focus of the next decade. The pace of technological disruption is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. So that's cool. So you can use this to test out the kind of results you'll get back from a particular model if you call the inference API. And when you sign up and get your API token, you can make a certain amount of requests per month for free. And the number is you can submit up to 30,000 characters per month. So we can see that in the documentation for the inference API. So, pardon me, the details about the usage limits are actually under /pricing. And so when you first sign up, you have a contributor free plan. And as I said, you can input up to 30,000 input characters per month for free, which may sound like a lot, but once you start testing, you'll probably eat through this pretty quickly. If you're using it as an individual, this might be enough. But if you're going to be exposing some application to end users, probably this will not be sufficient for that. But for only $9 a month, pretty reasonable price, you get 10 times that, 300,000 inference input characters, and then you just pay $25 per million. So it's quite an affordable solution. Just to contrast this, if you try to set up say an EC2 instance on Amazon Web Services to run Eleuther.ai, you'll need to run a virtual machine that has quite a bit of RAM, north of 20 or 25 gigabytes to run the 2.7 billion parameter model. So on AWS, you could be looking at several $100s a month to run a virtual machine that can serve inference against this model. So I think it's much easier, quicker, and cheaper to use the Accelerated Inference API, unless you're at huge scale where it's more cost effective to run your own hardware. Okay, so now let's go back to the model page and look at how we would take this model and deploy it into Bubble. So first of all, note that the various models that are available here on Hugging Face all have this same sort of structure. So you can get details about the model from the model card. It'll tell you what files and versions are associated with it, which is not relevant for our purposes right now. And it'll tell you some tags here related to the architecture and things. You can see some results and some performance metrics for some of the models. And then we have this Hosted Inference API test input here. So if we come back to our Eleuther model, the point here is that you're going to see these same 3 buttons for all the various models. And so this will tell you how you can deploy Accelerated Inference, or you can deploy it to SageMaker, how you can use it in, if you're using locally hosted Python runtimes, you can use this code to run a transformers pipeline, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but it's good to know about if you're into that. And then here is where we actually want to access the details for this particular API. So we want to go here. This is our 2.7 billion GPT-Neo. We want to click this, and now we see all the details that we need in order to be able to put this into our Bubble app. So first we have, so this is Python code, and what you could do if you were running locally is just copy and paste this code into a Python script and run it. And you'll get a response back by calling the API. So you're using the request module to package a URL, some headers, and you're sending a post request with this data, this JSON payload, which is going to be this here, because we're calling this query function with this payload, which is this. This is the text that we're going to be putting in here. This will serve as the payload, whatever the user types in here. And we can see here our API token. So when you sign up, so this is my API token. When you sign up for a Hugging Face account, you'll get your own. And it will be automatically populated in here for you, so you don't need to go searching for it. But if you don't, if you wanted to see it for some other reason in a different way, you can come into your settings. And if I open this up here, if you go to settings, and then API tokens, you can see it here. And I'm not going to show it, but you can see your own by clicking show and then copy and paste it. You're going to need it for Bubble, so might be useful to know about that. But as I said, it's also in here. So so what we're going to do is basically take this information and move it over into Bubble now. So the first thing to do is come over to your Bubble app and install API Connector if it's not installed. So under the Plugins tab, click Add Plugins and type in API or API Connector, and this will come up, and it's right here. Just click Install. It's free. It's built by Bubble, and then we're going to define an API to call this Hugging Face Eleuther API. So this is the one I built for the demo, but we're going to start from scratch. We'll say add another API. We'll call it Hugging Face. And you don't have to. If you're only going to be using Eleuther, you could just call it Eleuther.ai or GPT-Neo or whatever you like. If you plan to use multiple different models from Hugging Face, it sort of makes sense to have Hugging Face as your API and then have different endpoints within it. So let's call it Hugging Face. We'll add a shared header. So we know from this model card, so this is what we're going to do. Let's split this so that we can see this and Bubble at the same time. So we want to take this authorization header and put it in here, and then the value is going to be our bearer API token. We paste it in here, and this will be the same for all calls that we make on this API. So if you're going to be making multiple different model calls, then just stick it here in a shared header. If you're only going to be making a single API call, then you could just put it here if you would like. Ends up being the same, but anyway, it's simpler to put it here. And then now we want to define the call, so we'll call it Eleuther, or let's call it GPT-Neo 2.7 billion. And we want to get this URL. So this is the URL for the call. And we put that here, and we set it to a post, because we saw that it was a post request. And we want to use it as an action, because later we're going to be triggering this API call from a workflow action. And then we're all set. That's all you need to do to be able to call. So if we take this text and type it in here, we should be able to click initialize call and get some sample data back. So can you please let us know more details about your schedule and meeting location, Stinson on Friday, June 12th, blah, blah, blah. So that's it. Now you've got access to this API in your Bubble app. So very straightforward. And now let's look at how you might integrate this into an application. So the first thing I'd want to do is just create a blank page. We'll say, let's call it GPT-Neo and create. And then we're going to need a few elements on the page. We know that we'll want an input box for search, and we'll want a repeating group to display the data. So if you haven't used Bubble before, a repeating group just takes a data source, like from your database, for example, and populates the cells with the data from that data type. And then within the cell, we want to put some data from those objects. So the first thing we need to do in order for that to work is to define a data type. So I've defined a generated texts object here with a few fields. So we've got a generated text cleaned, prompt, and random seed. So what I'm going to do is do this again from scratch. So we'll say generated texts new. We'll create it, and I'll walk through each of those 4 fields. So the first thing we want to do is add a prompt field. And the prompt will be the text that the user enters. We want to save that. Just quickly show you here what the data is going to look like. We've got a generated text, which has a little number here, which is the random seed. Then it has the text coming back from the API. Then it has that text with the number removed. It has the prompt and we're missing the random seed field here, I think, in the display. Yeah, you can see the random seed here. So 98, 98. I'll explain this random seed in a second here, but this is what our data is going to look like after we define the fields. So we've got the prompt, we've got generated text, which will be a text type. We want to have generated text cleaned. That will also be a text type. And then we're going to generate a random seed. And I will explain this in just a minute. And those four things are enough to get us this sort of application here. So the reason we have this random seed field in here is if you call the model repeatedly with the same prompt, by default you'll get the same response back again and again. And this is different if you deploy it on your own hardware, but when you're calling it through the Accelerated Inference API, I believe it caches the response of a particular prompt and then it returns that very fast back to you the second and third and fourth time. We can see that here. If we reinitialize the call, we'll see our text here is details about your scheduled meeting location Stinson on Friday. We can reinitialize it and we're going to get the same Stinson on Friday and so forth. And so if, on the other hand, if we do this, if we put a number here and reinitialize, we'll see a different response come back. You see it takes a little bit longer, but now we have, can you please let us know, background education, forwarded by David Delaney. We'll get the same thing with David Delaney, but if we change this now to, say, a 13 and reinitialize again, then we'll get a totally different response. And so that's the idea behind that random seed. So here, can you please put your questions? We have already sent out a question in this regard to the Ministry of Science and Technology, and so on and so forth. So that's what that's the function of this random seed, is to give you a new, different response each time. Okay, so now that we've got the data set up, the data structure set up as we're going to need it, we're going to come back to the design of the page, and we're going to add. I'm going to make this page a little bit bigger just to give us a bit more room to work with. And we're going to add a button here to trigger the workflow to call the API. So let's call this, say, generate. And here we'll say enter a prompt. So what we want to do when we click on this generate button is to send the random seed appended to the prompt over to the API and then get the text back. And we're going to store that in the database, and we're going to store all the results in that table that we just defined, generated text new, and we're going to display them here. So the content here will be generated text new, and the data source will just be do a search for them. Right now we don't have any, but that's okay. And we set no constraints, so we'll get them all back. So now from here we need to do a little bit of logic on the database side. So when this button is clicked, what we want to do first of all is we want to create a stub for this generated text new object that's going to hold the data for the text that's going to be coming back in a second. So what we do first of all is we say create a new thing of that type, generated text new, and we want to set the random seed. Actually, we can click this to set all of the fields. So get the 4 fields here. We want to set the random seed first of all to a random string. So the way that we do that is by calculate formula and generate random string. And you can play around with these different settings. I've tried using numbers and special characters. I find that 2 numbers works pretty well. So if you say length of characters 2 and just use numbers, no letters, no special characters, this works pretty well. Special characters seem to work okay too. But you might get more sort of HTML and hashtags and sort of things back from the response. Seems to be less of that returned by just using numbers. So we set that to be the random seed. We want to set the generated text just to be, say, generating. We don't need it to be anything yet. We want to display it while we're waiting for the response to come back, which takes 2 or 3 seconds. So we'll just set these to generating by default. And the prompt is going to be whatever was typed into the input box. So that'll be input enter prompts value. So this sets up a default object, which we're going to modify in a second after we get the response from the API. So from here, we now want to call our custom endpoint. So this GPT-Neo endpoint, and the body. So this is the payload to the API. What we want to send is the result of step 1. So that's this new object that we created. We want to first take its random seed, and then we want to append the prompt. So result of step 1's prompt. And so this will be, as in this case, this will be 13 and then whatever the prompt is, or 99 and then the prompt, or what have you. And so that'll send over the request, and then we should get a response back, and we will set that. We will modify this object that we created in step 1 to its generated text field will be the response coming back from this. So we'll say make changes to thing. The thing to change will be the result of step 1's new generated text. And the field that we want to change first is generated text. It's just going to be the result of step 2 and its generated text. And then generated text cleaned will be the result of step 2's generated text, but we're going to find and replace the seed. So the text to find will be this generated text news random seed, and we're going to replace it with nothing. So that'll just clean it out. And then we should have a fully baked generated text new object with prompt random seed, generated text, and generated text cleaned. And so that's the bulk of it. So we should be able to see this now. So if we just put in a couple of fields here, field here will be, let's say, the prompt. We want to see the prompt for this object. And we want to then see the generated text clean here. And so if we preview this now, hopefully everything is hooked up and working as intended. So if we say no code platforms are, click enter, we see generating. This is what we set it to by default. And then when it comes back, it should replace it. No code platforms are not allowed. Please use the following code to request a code. Okay, let's try this. Music is the art of, and we see another one being generated down here. Music is the art of exploring the world through sound and voice. So that's pretty good. We say software engineering makes us, let's see what we get down here. Makes us more humane. IEEE Robotics and Automated Systems magazine. That's interesting. Okay, so it looks like we're working as intended. So I'm not going to go through styling. You can, software engineering makes us smarter, but do we really need it? There's a growing body of literature, so on and so forth. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to bother styling this anymore. I showed you a little bit of how you might style it in the intro demo, but you can, of course, do lots of different things to make this look much nicer. So yeah, I hope this was helpful for people. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and be happy to help with any issues you run into. Thanks for watching.